So I chose to do my presentation over the effect of salinity on alligators. So first of all, some quick alligator background. They live in freshwater environments, and so basically anywhere you can typically picture an alligator living is where they'll live at. Swamps, creeks, lakes, slow-moving rivers, anywhere in just freshwater environments. But interestingly, they try to avoid, for even living in like swamp areas and towards the coast, they uh they will avoid saltwater environments. And this is primarily due to the fact that they lack some physiological features to osmoregulate. And the first is that they lack a loop of Henle, which isn't found in any reptile species. And then the second is that they lack salt secreting glands, which are actually found in crocodiles. And so that's a big difference between alligators and crocodiles, is that the alligators do not possess these salt secreting glands that help them to osmoregulate. And it's why that you'll be able to see crocodiles in saltwater environments, but alligators don't really associate with them. And so a big issue for alligators right now is the salinization of fresh water. And it's basically when fresh water becomes more salty. And one of the ways that this happens is that it actually is currently going on at an unprecedented rate, and it's actually going on at a like more of a global scale too, and it's in no small part due to human interactions, like many other things that we're starting to see in the environment. And so salinization happens through rising saltwater levels. And to do this, I showed this seawater intrusion image that I found, and basically it just shows where as the global warming and things like that happen, then the seawater starts to rise. The human interactions that happen with that as well, such as like the pumping of fresh water out, you can see where there becomes this new space below ground level where the seawater can actually intrude and lead to a bunch of issues where the salt level increases in the fresh water. And there's other ways that this can happen too, through land clearance, and actually de-icing salts that are used on roadways are another way that this can take place. But how does this actually affect the alligator? So it's been shown that the electrolyte count in urine and plasma increases with the salinity exposure. And I included this table from the data that I found, and it shows where you can see basically in almost all of their electrolytes, and you can see that the sodium potassium ratio, sodium, phosphorus, calcium, they're all significantly increased in the salt water versus the fresh water, which is right here. And this is a big deal because it leads to a bunch of issues in them. And so what you can see is that a big thing too is that creatine kinase increases with the salinity, and this signals damages to kidney function. And this sort of goes along with what we talked about in class, where the more creatine kinase that you produce, you're having to do more phosphocreatine metabolism. And it shows that there's issues going on in the organism. And actually, it's been linked to kidney function. And additionally, the increases in salinity disrupts the the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. That's a mouthful. And basically, it's the primary manager of blood pressure and the saltwater balances in the body. So when that gets out of line, it leads to a bunch of issues in these alligators, which we'll look more at on the next slide. And so hormones in the sterogeninic pathway are altered, and that's what all these images are. And this is all coming out of the same research where there's significant differences. You can see in angiotensin 2, you can see it in corticosterone, and you can also see it in all these that have the stars. There's been all these issues with how these hormones are altered. And so what this basically does is it leads to issues with that system, and it's no longer able to fully function to manage the osmoregulations or the blood pressure in these organisms. And so the one that's the most important, or that the paper really went in depth on, is corticosterone and some of the issues that come along with it. And so it's actually been shown that as corticosterone levels increase in organisms, which you can see drastically happens between the freshwater levels, which are depicted in the white in all of these images, and the saltwater levels, which are in the black, it's been linked to reduced growth, lower white blood cell counts, and an increased risk of infection and disease, which leads to fitness disadvantages in these alligators. And so, because of the fact that they're becoming smaller and more sickly, the predators are able to have higher success rates, and it's leading to just some issues that you can see that the alligator is obviously not going to be as successful when its fitness is being decreased. And then lastly, we have our takeaways here. So alligators do not have means of osmoregulation, which we talked about at the beginning. And so that's going to lead to a lot of issues when you put them in these environments where they get exposed to higher levels of salt. And a lot of this, as is with, I think, is going to be the common theme with these presentations. It's largely due to human interaction and how the increases in salinity levels by humans have made all these issues with these organisms that live in freshwater. And lastly, that the salinity increases, they drastically affect the physiology of the alligators. And so kidney failure is obviously not something that an organism is going to be able to cope very well with. And along with that, you see that there's the disruption of the hormonal systems that come along with this. And the stunted growth and fitness issues are just going to lead to issues in the populations of these alligators, which is never a good thing. And I think a reason this is important to look at now is that it's going to be seen not only in alligators, but it's likely going to affect a lot of other reptiles and creatures that call freshwater home. As these saltwater levels get altered, they're ultimately going to lower the fitness of more than just one species. And so lastly, I just included my literature cited, and that pretty much wraps up my presentation.